Welcome everyone. This is Libby Mucciaroni, Member Engagement and Education Manager at the Organic Trade Association. I'm pleased to welcome you to our webinar today on developing public-private partnerships to address organic research needs. This webinar is presented by Dr. Lakeisha Odom of the Foundation for Food and Agriculture, Drs. Jessica Shade and Amber Saligo of the Organic Center, and they will be joined by Breeze Tenser of the Organic Farming Research Foundation for our Q&A panel discussion today. The Organic Center is a nonprofit research and education organization based out of Washington, D.C. They work to conduct and convene credible, evidence-based science for the environmental and health effects of organic food and farming and communicate the findings to the public. The Organic Center's work is supported by companies and individuals who desire a sustainable and secure food system that promotes the health of humans and the environment. A couple of things before we begin. This webinar is being recorded. In the next 48 business hours, all registrants will receive a follow-up email, including PDF slides of the presentation, handouts, and any helpful links that are shared, as well as a registration link to view today's recording on demand. Included in the platform today is a handout on the outcomes from last year's convening. By clicking on the file, it will open in a browser, and then you can download it today. During registration, we ask that you let our presenters know if you have any questions on today's topic. With over 175 registrants for today's webinar, we are so thankful to have such a diverse and engaged audience. Many of these questions you submitted have been taken into account in both today's presentation and in preparation for our Q&A session. For any questions or comments that you may have during our presentation today, please share them with us in the questions pane. Our presenters will respond to your questions as time permits during our Q&A discussion. For any questions not addressed today, our staff will follow up with you. And finally, if you happen to have any technical issues during the webinar today, please reach out to us in the questions pane and we will follow up directly with you, or you can email me directly. And with that, I'd like to turn over the presentation to Dr. Jessica Shade, the Director of Science Programs at the Organic Center. Thanks, Jessica.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Libby. And thanks to everyone who's here to talk about strategic partnerships to build the scaffolding for prioritizing research projects to address the top needs of the organic community. So the goal for today's webinar is to tell you about some of the priorities that we've been gathering and are shared between organic farmers, industry members, and researchers, and then get your input on what you feel is the most important, and then anything that we're missing. So as Libby mentioned, I'm Jessica Shade. I'm the Director of Science Programs for the Organic Center. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Organic Center, we're a nonprofit that focuses on communicating research on organic issues. And then we also collaborate with academic and governmental institutions to fill gaps in our knowledge about organic food and farming. And if you go to the next slide, you'll be able to see that last year we partnered with the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research to develop a roadmap for research areas that would have the biggest impact on moving organic as a whole forward, which we could work with on the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research to develop public-private partnerships to support. I also want to give a shout out to OFRF because they've been working with us on this as well. And I know that their executive director, Breeze Tenser, is here, so she can help with any questions as well when we open up the line for discussion. So I am going to pass it over to Lakeisha, who can talk a little bit about FFAR and their interests and involvement. And then we'll move on to the convening that we had last year, where we brought members of the organic community to talk about these issues together. And we'll talk a little bit about the outcomes from that convening. So Lakeisha is the Scientific Program Director of Soil Health at FFAR, where she promotes the use of innovative science and interdisciplinary thinking to tackle today's complex challenges in food systems and agriculture. She's also committed to cultivating increased diversity in a new generation of food and agriculture scientists. And prior to working at FFAR, she was a AAAS policy fellow at the US Department of Agriculture Biotechnology Regulatory Service. She has a master's degree in environmental resource policy from George Washington University and a doctorate in integrative biosciences from Tuskegee University. So Lakeisha, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Jessica. I really appreciate that. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being in conversation with us today. We really are excited to share with you some of the work that we did last year and then really have an opportunity to dig in and engage with you and get feedback and questions and just insights on the road mapping exercise that Jessica mentioned, and we'll talk much more in detail about it as we continue on. Next slide, please. Perfect. But before that, I wanted to just give a sense of who FFAR is and why we're in these spaces. So FFAR, the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, is also a 501c3 organization. We were created in the 2014 Farm Bill with the intention of spurring innovation and collaboration across agricultural sectors. We were endowed with an initial $200 million to invest through leveraging public-private partnerships. So that means that for every dollar that FFAR spends of its initial corpus, we must find a non-federal matching partner. And this has been really exciting in finding opportunities to increase research dollars in the ag space while engaging with other non-federal entities. We can engage with industry partners, we can engage with nonprofits, international partners. As long as they're not a federal source of dollars, then we can find opportunities potentially to match with them. And we often find ways in which we could be complementary and not duplicative of the work of USDA. Next slide, please. So at FFAR, we envision a world in which ever innovative and collaborative science provides every person access to affordable, nutritious food grown on thriving farms. So we typically find ourselves to be quite agnostic to production systems, but instead we look at ways in which we can use research, sound science to improve options, empower farmers and ranchers to make the decisions that are best for their production systems. So we're always looking for these intractable issues within a sector. And so that's why this brought us to initially engage with Jessica and the amazing folks at Organic Trade Association to really identify some opportunities in the organic sector to see if there was some potential for leveraging partnerships, leveraging resources and identifying opportunities to collaborate. Next slide, please. And so we, as I mentioned, we work through these unique partnerships so that we can support our innovative science, we can address challenges in food and agriculture. So much of the ways in which we do that are through a number of convenings similar to the one that we had in September of 2019, of last year. We use these convenings as an opportunity to get groups in the space to start talking about what are those intractable issues, what are those challenges, barriers that research can address. But we recognize that those convenings are often these spaces where, based on time availability, back in the times where we had travel budgets and the opportunities to engage. So we recognize that we could only invite a limited number of people in that initial conversation, but it was always our intent and our commitment that we make this process as open and as transparent as possible. And so what we hope to do today is, as we've circulated the findings from that report, we really want, as Jessica mentioned, to get a sense of are those the areas that are issues? And to be perfectly candid, what we decided might be priorities last year, this year has been very eye-opening. So there may be some other challenges or issues that we wouldn't have even thought to consider to address through research last year that are at the top of folks' minds today. Next slide, please. So I just want to reiterate how FFAR works. We create these novel research partnerships, we find emerging issues, then we leverage public dollars, and we fill research gaps. So all of that will be what your input today will allow us to do, is identify hopefully the emerging issues and those research gaps. And then FFAR, along with our additional partners in the space that have interest, can look for opportunities to leverage those public dollars. Next slide. And I just showed this slide to say that since our creation in 2014, we've gotten pretty good at finding funding partners. So to date, we have funded over 160 grants with over 400 distinct funding partners across international landscapes, nonprofits, as well as industry partnerships. Next slide. And this is just a slide to show that, yes, I manage the soil health portfolio. However, we have 5 other challenge areas in which we are identifying opportunities for engagement. And so although I'm focused on soil health, whatever bubbles up to the top that might be of interest to this group doesn't have to stay solely in that soil health realm. That's just the initial space in which we started to engage. Next slide, that might be the last slide. Oh, okay. So we also just wanted to take 2 seconds to talk about challenges and opportunities and how we could work together. Next slide. I think I have 2 more, and then we can get back to engaging with you. So as we talked about, FAR is often looking for those intractable issues, those spaces where there could be opportunity for leveraging. So we recognize that there are a number of challenges or opportunities in this space. There's an increase in demand, but we recognize that the organic system continues to face a number of challenges around managing soil health, for example, or identifying research-based practical information, and then thinking about how we can develop the best suites of soil management practices for specific operations. And we recognize that due to the diversity of the organic sector, that prioritizing research areas can sometimes be a bit complex and complicated, and those needs must be paired with research capabilities as well as funding constraints. So FAR is really interested in spaces like this because it's an amazing sector that is growing, but it also has a number of research needs. And so this is the type of space that FAR typically really enjoys working in. And so we're hoping at the end of today to have a lot more information around what are some of those challenges, what are those areas that might bubble to the top that might be a priority, or are the areas we've already identified in the roadmap exactly kind of where we need to sit. And so we really are interested in the discussion portion that will happen shortly. Next slide. So we're hoping that the space that FAR can play is not at all to in any way say that we are experts in this space, but more how can we be a facilitator? How can we be a convener? How can we be a leverager? And so we're looking at opportunities to identify needs with the organic community and work with you to see if there's a space that FAR makes sense to play. So I want to reiterate that at no point does FAR feel as though we are the group that should be leading this. It's more we recognize that there might be a role that a group such as ours, which is looking for opportunities for partnership and leveraging, there's a space that we could play. So that's what we're looking for now, is thinking about not only what are the priorities, but what's the appropriate place that FAR could fit in this space. And hopefully through our discussion, we'll get a better sense of that as well. Now, next slide, please. So I think that I'll conclude my short description, but if there are any other questions about FAR, please feel free to put those in the chat or follow up with me later. This is my email address, so don't hesitate to contact me with any other questions, but I'll happily turn everything over to Jessica, and I'll be back when we get to the discussion portion. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks so much, Lakeisha. And Libby, if you go to the next slide, I'll talk about the convening that we held last year with FAR, examining methods for building a scaffolding to prioritize research that would address the top needs of the organic community. So the convening was attended by a broad array of farmers, researchers, policymakers, industry members, and nonprofits who engaged in panels. We also had listening sessions, breakout discussions, and then group activities to try and develop a roadmap for research areas that would have the biggest impact on moving the organic sector forward. And our main goal was to find common ground between the research needs of farmers, scientific expertise, and then the funding interests of industry members. The convening participants examined research areas that would have the greatest impact on advancing the organic sector. We also explored avenues for private-public partnerships, and then we identified areas where scientific advancement met farmer need and industry support. And then we compiled all of the outcomes from that convening into a white paper, which you can download in the handout section of this webinar. And Amber Siligo, the Organic Center's Associate Director of Science Programs, is going to walk us through the top areas that are highlighted in the convening outcomes. So Amber, I'm going to pass it over to you, and Libby, you can go to the next slide.
Thanks so much. So again, like Jessica mentioned, the primary goal, the overall reason why we were there that day for the convening was to find these areas of research that the organic industry would be willing to put forward matching dollars. And that matched up with the research expertise that we had in the room, as well as the needs of the farmers. And I'll say that overall, the organic industry members expressed interest most in funding research that increased the domestic supply of organic food and fiber, which makes a lot of sense. And they also were interested in funding research that increases consumer education and awareness and addresses the consumers' concerns at the time, which were climate change and then also interest in nutrition. There were several research priorities that emerged that was of interest across the stakeholder groups. And I'm just going to run through briefly what those priorities are. And you should also have, these are listed in no particular order and available to you in the convening report that we have as a handout for you. So I'll start with organic seed breeding. In order for organic crops to be truly robust, their seeds have to come from plants that are bred under organic conditions for organic conditions. And so the group expressed that there just aren't enough organic seed varieties available. Some additional nuances for organic seed breeding research included regional breeding to accommodate the regional differences in climate and soil, etc. And also selecting for flavor and nutrition as a target for consumer preference, which could help give the organic market a competitive edge. Research on soil health was flagged as an area of shared interest. A lot of past research has made really significant advances in supporting on-farm soil health, but now the new areas of interest included a systems-based research program that connects the soil health to microbial communities, to water quality, to food safety, plant productivity, as well as plant nutrition, and how that would translate later on to human health. Another research priority was agronomic and socioeconomic research. The main interest within this research category was really to address the barriers that keep farmers from transitioning to organic or that prevent them from continuing to farm organically. Again, this connects back to increasing that domestic supply of organic products. There was a desire to focus on farm profitability for this research and to ensure that organic farmer livelihoods were secure and sustainable over time. And this research could prioritize the reasons why farmers choose or why they don't choose to farm organically and include an analysis of risk perception. There was also an emphasis on accounting for the true costs and true benefits of organic farming. So this would incorporate things like a monetary value for ecosystem services like carbon sequestration, improved water quality, and beneficial biodiversity. Then we have climate resiliency, and this is obviously climate change is really high on people's minds, maybe more so this year than last year. But last year, climate change mitigation as well as adaptation to climate change was identified as an area of interest across all stakeholder groups. And there was a wide range of research questions within this topic area. And those questions ranged from livestock forage management to water usage to seed breeding for climate change resiliency, in various regions across the US. and the role of crop diversification in protecting against the losses from extreme weather changes. And overall, there was an interest in just better understanding how climate change would continue to affect farmers, how farmers could be more resilient to those changes, and finally, how organic farmers can also help mitigate future climate change. Then we have agricultural technology, which a lot of people are very interested in. So mostly what came up was research on technology that can improve the feasibility of organic operations. It was expressed that organic agriculture definitely has room for precision technologies that could help make things like water and nutrient usage more efficient, as well as making food safety monitoring more reliable and real time, and then to reduce the burden of labor-intensive tasks such as weeding. However, while this was of high interest, technological advances are needed and welcomed. The group also stressed that the biological and ecological foundations of organic agriculture still have to be considered when designing these precision technologies. And so one of the suggestions was to always include a sociologist on any ag tech research team, which could help ensure that those true costs and true benefits of ag technology are considered. And then last but not least, we have animal health and livestock integration. Throughout the discussion of all the research gaps and priorities, the topics of animal health and livestock integration into cropping systems continuously came up. I'll say in general, though, it was noted that there is a dearth of animal science research in organic. And there is also an increasing interest in livestock integration. And so therefore, we need more knowledge about how organic practices, including pasture-based production, will affect things like animal health, but also human health, thinking about food safety, and also soil health, all of those things simultaneously. So next slide, please, Libby. Great, thank you. So in addition to identifying the research gaps and the priorities, there was also a lot of discussion about the limitations that exist for current organic research and what we need to overcome in future projects. So the group concluded that future research would be more successful if the following things were considered. More on-farm research is needed, and participation from farmers is needed from the very beginning, early on, even in the research development process. And this would ensure that projects are developed with farmer needs in mind. However, there also needs to be proper consideration of the effort that is required for farmer participation. So there are limits to what farmers can provide. They can provide the research setting, but some farmers express that they really need researchers to be the ones to provide the staff to conduct the research. And farmers need to be properly compensated monetarily for their time, and particularly when they are involved in really complex projects. So these budgets for these larger, more complex projects need to be developed with farmer time in mind. The second thing is, in order to accommodate the diversified farming nature of organic farming systems, research needs to focus more on systems-based questions that can move across crop types. And in addition, the studies should also take place across the US in multiple regions so that the results can be more applicable to the wide range of the growing conditions that exist for organic farmers across the country. Whole systems approaches, which are what we need, also require interdisciplinary academic teams. And this can be more challenging and time-consuming to manage. You can imagine that you have lots of different academics with different languages, and to find that common language, it takes time to develop. And these projects will require more funding for that time. So a lot of funding resources grant funding for 2 to 5 years. But when you have a big interdisciplinary team, sometimes longer and larger grants can allow this type of research to be more successful. On the flip side, smaller grants that have faster turnaround times can help applied research be more accessible to farmers. It was expressed that farmers really could use the information as quickly as possible, and some results can still be useful even before they're published scientifically. So outreach plans that can keep farmers in the loop throughout the research process will be more effective than just disseminating the results to the farmers after the results are published. It was noted that farmer networks need to be built in order to create long-term regionally specific databases that farmers can access, and this will help farmers find local solutions to local challenges. And finally, extension-focused grants could really help increase adoption of best practices. So a lot of federal grants already include an extension component to the research, but that outreach and information transfer is often more of an afterthought because a lot of the budget dollars get eaten up by the research itself. So it was suggested that grants that specifically target sharing those research-based recommendations could help ensure that more thought and consideration goes into extension. And that's it for me.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Amber. And if we go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about next steps. So our next steps are, number one, to get additional input from the organic community. And that's you, everybody on this call, as well as anyone else that you would like to share this with on the white paper on the outcomes that Amber was talking about, to help us identify the research priorities that meet that trifecta of being critical need to organic farmers, of interest to funders and organic industry members, and then also use the latest scientific research techniques. So as we collect that data, hopefully we'll have a great conversation after this presentation. But also, Libby, if you don't mind putting a link to the survey in the chat, we're also collecting input via a survey. So if you have time, please fill that out. That would be hugely helpful for us. Share it widely within the organic community. So moving on from this, we had, a great start with the convening. Now we're trying to get a broader portion of the organic community involved, since the convening was pretty small, as Lakeisha mentioned. So we're looking for comments on what we have so far, what people would prioritize, what we're missing, and then we're going to use that input to develop some priority areas that we can collaborate with FFAR on for an organic focused research funding initiative. So we can go ahead and open it up for discussion. Feel free to ask us any questions about the goals of the convening, talk about what you think is most critical for organic research, really anything that you think will help us work toward a common goal of advancing organic. And a reminder, we are also collecting input through that survey I mentioned. So if even if you feel like your comment has been said on this webinar, it's still helpful for us to get it documented through that survey. So please fill that out. So I know that the first question is for OFRF. So I'm going to put Breeze on the screen with us. Breeze, if you share your camera, perfect. All right, so Breeze, how has OFRF been involved with this process? And then how does this priority setting line up with OFRF's National Organic Research Agenda?
Great, thank you. It was great to be able to be at the convening last year when we could all still be together in person, and to be able to hear some of the diverse perspectives on priorities. As you know, Jessica, we have been working to address research needs of the organic sector for 30 years, and one of the key ways we do that is by regularly surveying organic farmers across the country. Our last national survey of certified organic producers was in 2015, with the results published as a National Organic Research Agenda in 2016. And thanks to a grant from OREI, we are just completing our 7th national survey of certified organic producers, as well as a parallel survey of transitioning growers that will be added to with 16 focus groups. We're doing farmers across the country this winter. So we don't have the results from our newest survey yet, but we will look forward to sharing those and bringing that to the discussion as we have that available. But based on feedback from our last grower survey, I think there's definitely a lot of synergies with some of the themes we heard at the convening. We definitely learned that while farmer research priorities vary a lot by region, but there's definitely some clear commonalities, particularly around soil health, fertility management, weed management. And based on that farmer feedback, we have sort of 4 clear priorities to continue addressing those grower research needs, and those include advancing soil health and fertility management to sequester carbon, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and build resilience to climate change stresses, increasing research on systems approaches to weed, pest, and disease management, promoting research on organic livestock, poultry, advanced grazing management, and crop livestock integration, and promote breeding and development of new public crop cultivars for resilience to climate disruption and enhanced performance. So I think there's a lot of synergies with some of those threads that came out through the convening.
Perfect. All right. So now we've got some questions, other questions. So I'm going to have Amber, Lakeisha hop back on, and we'll kind of talk through some of these. So one of the questions that popped up was, how can someone get involved? So you are involved right now. Thank you all so much for being here. Fill out that survey and just let us know what you think is the most interesting cutting edge priorities. So one of the questions that we have for FFAR is, does FFAR offer a competitive grant process, or is it an invite-only situation? So Lakeisha, I'll let you answer that, but from what I've heard, it's very variable.
Yep, absolutely. So we do a combination of funding opportunities. So invite only, that person might be thinking about our direct fund process, and that might be a space where, for example, I, as a scientific program director, have prioritized a specific space that I want to develop something, and then I come up with a concept and then find additional partners, bring them in, and we kind of co-create together. And then we often will have competitive opportunities as well. So every year FFAR has our seeding solutions, which is our one open call that's across every challenge area. And that budget limit, you can come in for requests at a minimum of 300,000 and a maximum of $1 million. But that opportunity does require that the applicant bring matching partners. A number of our other opportunities may not pass that match on to the applicant. It just depends on the partnership, the competitive opportunity that we design, and then what makes the most sense for that particular partnership. So those are 2 ways that we can work together. We have competitive and also direct fund opportunities. We also create consortia. So we have a wide range of ways that we can create and fund projects together.
Great, thanks so much, Lakeisha. So another comment is looking at priorities that people want to see. So I'll be kind of bringing some of these up in case it pings people's thoughts on what they'd like to see research on. So one of the suggestions was looking at how organic food diet can impact whether eating an organic diet has an impact on health over the long term. So I'm glad that got brought up. There has not been a lot of research on that, but it is a question that I get asked over and over again. So that would definitely be really helpful. So thanks for bringing that one up. I'm glad that people are thinking about the gaps that they've seen in the research and what needs to be filled. So somebody also noted that they'd like to see the % of USDA research funds for organic agriculture equal or surpass the percent of food sold as organic in America? Completely agree. One of the things that we're hoping to do with this program is to increase the funding availability for organic, because as you note, it's pretty limited within the USDA. So yes, we are completely on board, and glad you brought that up. Some other people are talking about looking at things like agroforestry. That's definitely an area where more research is needed, especially within organic. So I love it. I love these ideas. Here's a question about some examples of projects that FFAR are supporting. So Lakeisha, can you give an example of an organic research project that that has FFAR support, or a project within the organic community? Somebody was asking just to get some ideas for what FFAR is supporting.
I actually might punt that question to Brees. FFAR and ORF, Organic Research Farming Foundation, we've partnered together for the last 2 years to kind of co-fund some projects in the space. So maybe I'll let Brees talk a little bit about how we've been working together, or we've worked together the last 2 years.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's been a really excellent partnership. We've been funding on-farm research for 27 years now, but have been able to grow our grant making program over the last couple of years thanks to the partnership with FFAR, where we did bring in matching funds from industry partners, including probably some who are here on the call today. And basically, we pooled that fund and ran it as a fully competitive grant process with certain priorities called out and highlighted based on our farmer survey and some challenge areas that came up really strong from the farmer community, and particularly around soil health, which I think was sort of the backbone of our partnership with FFAR through those competitive grants. And the projects we funded were really diverse across the country. This year, we funded 13 new research projects, a little over half of which were specifically tackling soil health challenges, and they're all listed on the OFRF website. Yeah, just very diverse projects, but I would say soil health was a major theme in terms of what we've been funding jointly with FFAR and organic production systems, and all of those were on-farm, relatively smaller grants in the $20,000 per project range.
Great. Here's a question for Amber. Would you mind explaining a little bit more about what systems-based studies mean? So what does it mean to have this holistic approach when you're looking at challenges on the farm?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of research, just by the nature of science, it becomes reductionist. It's very linear. It's like, if you do this to this, then what happens to that thing? But when we're talking about organic farms, we often have lots of crops within one single field. So if I were to do some reductionist research and say, I want to look at strawberries and what pest problem strawberries has and how to address that pest problem for strawberries, but that pest might also be an issue for other crops that are on the farm, or maybe they're not. So it's really, how do we then address the pest issues for all the crops on the farm, for instance, would be like one whole systems approach. Another whole systems approach could be, even if you just had one crop that you're dealing with, say you're interested in improving yield by trying to use organic practices that affect the soil qualities. So instead of just looking at, how does this organic soil amendment affect soil fertility for that, you might also want to look at, beyond fertility, how does that include other aspects of soil health, like soil structure, water holding capacity, the microbial community underground. So it's really about expanding the thinking between just like very linear relationships to looking at sort of the whole ecosystem altogether, which is really like the tenet of organic farming in the first place.
Yeah, and I can give an example of one of the Organic Center projects of what a question would look like if it were just the linear A equals B that Amber was talking about versus systems-based. So one of our projects looks at citrus screening disease and trying to manage the Asian citrus psyllid, which carries this disease. So a project that would not be systems-based is looking at developing materials, biological materials that are organic compliant that kills that Asian citrus psyllid. Instead, what we're trying to do with our project is look at this holistically, and what a systems-based project would look at is not only how those materials impact the Asian citrus psyllid, but how they're also impacting the beneficial insects, looking at what we plant on the farm to attract beneficial insects that can also help us manage those Asian citrus psyllids. Also looking at how that interacts with plant health and nutrients that we give to the plant. So if we increase the soil nutrients, does that make the plant more resilient when the Asian citrus psyllids infect it with the bacteria? And how does that impact the populations of Asian citrus psyllids? So it's really, the projects that are systems-based are looking at multiple different factors all around that same problem. So you don't need to be looking at 10 problems at once, but you do need to look at multiple different factors that can all work together to solve the issue that you're trying to look at. So it's kind of an example. Breeze, do you have anything to add to that? I know that you guys have worked with a lot of systems-based projects in the past as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that was a great answer. We definitely really are, it's a key to our grant making program is looking at systems-based approaches. And yeah, I think a lot of the research that we're funding, and including the work that we've been funding in partnership with FFAR, has been really focused on some of those systems-based challenges.
Great. So here's another question for Lakeisha, and it is about intellectual property. So through FAR funding, and this is about other programs, not necessarily the organic program, because we are very focused on keeping things non-proprietary, but are there programs through FAR that do fund proprietary research? And then also in your programs, your experience with programs that are funding non-proprietary research, how do you encourage industry to invest in them when they're not going to be the ones who own that technology at the end? Because that will be the case with organic. You know, we really want to make sure that this information is available for all. So how have you seen that working?
So I've seen that a couple of ways. So that's a very great question, because it's a real challenge. And so what we typically have seen, the IP issues or the concerns or needs for IP show up more in our consortia, typically because they will be a collaborative effort of multiple industry partners that typically could be in competition with each other. So what we have managed to do is come up with an IP policy that it's actually available online, we can share, and then during the grant award process, we may have to make some adjustments. But typically what we try to do is ensure that as much can be made public as possible. So there may be something like an embargo period where the information is reserved for a year or two and then released to the public. That's one example of a number of models that we've tried to come up with to really think through how to kind of protect that IP need, but also share as much information as possible. And so if someone wants like more detail on examples, we can definitely, catch up offline, because we've done a number of different models. So there's not necessarily one way that we do it. We work within developing these projects and then try to find a way that our partners can share as much information as possible while meeting their own IP requirements. The second question around how do we encourage industry to participate in some spaces where they won't necessarily own the technology, that's why we try to stay in what we call our pre-competitive space. And that's the space where everyone's having some of the similar challenges and no one entity has enough resources to fund research to resolve it. And so those spaces around For example, a number of folks are struggling with these challenges around adoption. And I think Jessica and Amber mentioned this need for socioeconomic research. And so that's a space where everyone knows that they want to see an increase of adoption of soil health practices. But what is the mechanism by which you do that? That is, I think, a space that we would consider in that pre-competitive space, because everyone is facing some of the same challenges. No one entity has the answer or can fund research extensive enough to address this systematic challenge, because it isn't just education, it isn't just engaging extension, it isn't just incentives. It's like this huge complex box that we don't quite understand. And so those are the types of spaces where we can entice industry, because they have these challenges as well. They don't have the answer and they don't have the resources to resolve it themselves. So those are the spaces where, when I talk about those intractable issues, those issues that multiple partners may find themselves addressing, or they've made it their strategic priority to look into those spaces, those are the spaces we tend to try to gravitate to, because we feel as though we can have more interest and excitement from our industry partners. And it's managed to work out, I think, relatively well. I mean, of course, there's always a danger of industry partners wanting you to focus on a thing that is very specific to their supply chain. That is the nature of this work. But if you look at the portfolio of projects we funded, we tend to fund projects that have multiple industry partners, so that we're not just funding one group. We're looking at challenges that face multiple partners. And then there's that exciting challenge of finding ways to work together in that pre-competitive space and figuring out what that looks like. So it is possible, but it does take a lot of input, like the conversations we're having today. It takes a lot of crafting. When we fund those opportunities, they really sometimes will take a year or two to really evolve, because we really have to ensure that every partner involved, as well as farmers and ranchers, are getting what they need out of the research that we're funding. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the things that we're trying to do here with the organic sector, which can be complicated because the organic sector is so diverse. I mean, we have everything from dairy to crops to textiles. So that's one of the challenges that we're working on, is finding those research questions that will improve organic and advance organic across the board, regardless of what your specific topic within that sector is. So it is a challenge, as Lakeisha mentioned, but there are plenty of areas that are of interest to organic as a whole. So that's another one of our goals, is trying to identify those areas so that we can coordinate funding to advance the sector altogether. So another suggestion here is looking at the impact of U.S. farmers from foreign imports and looking at fraud. So I'm really glad you brought that up. That is a huge topic. I know the Organic Trade Association has recently launched an organic fraud prevention program that actually tackles that directly and has been looking at that in depth. So it's definitely something that we want to keep on our radar. Here is a question for Amber, and it's about training. So the comment is that we need more organic inspectors, certification personnel, people to understand conversion techniques, etc. So the question is, could there be a project on how and where best to teach organic? And so, Amber, how does that align with some of the outcomes about extension that we've been seeing from the convening that we held last year?
That's a really great question. And in fact, I would say that extension is one of the greatest needs, this information transfer. And something that I've seen successful in other grant proposals is this idea of train the trainer programs. There are multiple opportunities where we could improve training, or not improve training, but increase the accessibility of it. Starting from building more curriculums at universities for extension-based, for having tertiary degree programs that really focus more on extension, training people for extension versus academia, having these train-the-trainer programs. Actually, I was hoping, I'm going to throw this right back at you, Jess, but I was hoping that it seems like the OATS program really fits into this model too, and I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about that, because I think this is a successful model and idea of, you know, funding these train-the-trainer type programs.
Yeah, so OATS stands for Organic Agronomy Training Series, I think. And it is an initiative that came out of the Organic Trade Association and the Grow Voluntary Checkoff, which trains the trainers exactly as you mentioned, Amber. And I think that that type of a model fits in really well with some of the outcomes that have been flagged from the convening and from the organic community, because we need more organic extension, more organic technology transfer to farmers. So projects that really address that head on, I think would fit in well with what we've been hearing from the people that we've been talking to. Another thing that I know has been mentioned, but I will mention again, is that any priorities that are funded by FFAR can't overlap with USDA funding priorities. So that's one of the things that I thought was especially promising for extension specific projects, because the organic funding that's available through the USDA always has an extension component that's never the primary focus. So I love that people are flagging it, because I think it'll fit in well with what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Here is does anyone have any additions to that? All right, so this is a question for Lakeisha. Is FFAR able to partner with international, non-US partners? And I'm not, you know, this question could be viewed as a funding question. So can you get funding from outside the US? Or it could be a research question. Can you work with research partners outside the US? It could even be a focus. Can you work with US partners, but on areas that are outside the US? So for example, collaborating with a US institution with researchers who are researching tropical systems within organic. So it's kind of multi-level question.
And I can answer all three. So the first question is, can we, for example, use funds from international partners to match for projects? Absolutely. And we've done that previously. Can we have international applicants? Absolutely. And then in thinking about the types of projects that you can work on in those spaces, because our dollars come from the Farm Bill, we do like to understand that whatever research we fund will have a benefit to US farmers and ranchers, but it doesn't necessarily have to only be based in the US. For example, we funded one project with the Gates Foundation, as well as the UK's, their version of USDA called DFID. And that project has research sites in Illinois, but they also have research sites in the UK as well as Africa. But the project itself is looking at increased photosynthetic efficiency of crops. So those crops can be based anywhere. The tests can happen anywhere. The research sites can be anywhere, but we have a clear link to how that research and those results will be able to benefit US farmers. So as long as the case can be made that the findings would be beneficial to US agriculture, then that's not a barrier. I will be candid and transparent and say, if there was a project that was based in another country, and it was solely focused in that country, and there was no way to disseminate that information back, that project would likely be a bit less successful than if it was one of multiple research sites and some of those sites be based in the US. I hope that was helpful, but the answer is yes. It's just The question would be, what type of project are folks thinking about? And if folks have an idea, again, reach out to me. We can talk about it. I can at least give more guidance and input or feedback from the types of projects we've funded historically.
That's helpful. And so it actually has to have a link to US farmers, not just US industry. So it can't be a US company that imports, say, organic coffee or organic bananas. I think those are two of the biggest organic imports. Okay, that's good to know. All right, thanks for clarifying that. Here is a comment that somebody is very interested in economic aspects of systems research. So as we're thinking about systems-based research, not just thinking about all of the different pathways of aspects that filter into the farm system, but also the economic aspects of those systems. So connecting that to farmer livelihoods, farmer profitability. So thank you so much for making that connection. It is something that I hear over and over again, especially when it comes to organic research. There just isn't enough research on profitability. The Organic Center actually has a project right now that's looking at soil health and trying to make that connection between farmer income and soil health. And it's this, big meta-analysis, and there's just not enough research out there to do a full profitability analysis. So we're looking at yield, but when I tell anyone that, they always remind me, yield doesn't mean profitability, which I completely agree. So I'm glad you brought up the need for more economic aspects, because that is a big gap in the research right now.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to that, Jessica, too. I really appreciate that comment in respect to the systems-based way of thinking, because we do often see research proposals that get funded that will really heavily emphasize, more of what's going on in the field, the natural processes versus an emphasis on the economic side of things. And those interdisciplinary, big interdisciplinary projects that I was talking about before, we really need more of that work that looks at all of what's going on simultaneously. Like, how does soil health, increased soil health, translate not just to the health of the plants and carbon sequestration, but how does that translate to the success of the farmer? And beyond just the monetary success, but also their livelihoods, their security, etc. And we really need to look at all of those things simultaneously and have these big research teams that include sociologists, that include agronomists, instead of just really focusing on one aspect or the other, in different study systems.
Absolutely. So I'm so glad you brought that together. And it looks like we are almost out of time. I'm going to do one more question. And the question is, could FFAR, OFRF, the Organic Center facilitate connecting potential partners to develop systems-based projects and funders? Because since all of FFAR funding needs to be matched, how can we help universities match that funding, especially because in the organic world, there isn't a lot of matching funding available. I speak with researchers all the time who say it's easy if you're working in the conventional world. There is a lot of matching funding that you can leverage. It's a lot more difficult in the organic world. So I will just wrap this up by saying yes. So right now we're just in the development stage. We haven't figured out exactly what the final structure will look like, but the Organic Center, I know OFRF and FFAR are all very committed to helping raise those matching dollars. So it's not going to be just left to the researchers to come up with their own matching funding. We're going to help you find those matching dollars through whatever programs we can, whether it's the Organic Grow voluntary checkoff or other industry partners that we have connections to. I know that OFRF provides matching funds for their partnership with FFAR as well. So we're not trying to discourage anyone from finding those matching funds. If you can, that would be fantastic, but we're not going to leave anyone out. you know, to find, if they can't find those matching funds, we're going to help you. Of course, the reality is that right now finding matching funds could be difficult, but we are going to work extremely hard to make it happen. So.
And I'll just share from our experience, the first year we had a partnership with FFAR, we actually kind of arranged a smaller partnership to make sure we could find those matching funds from industry partners. And we were able to, and then the year 2 of our partnership with FFAR, we were able to grow that, that dollar amount. So we were able to bring in more from FFAR because we also were able to bring in more from other donors to pool, which meant that overall we were able to grant out a much larger pool of total research grants. So in our experience, that worked well.
Great.
And this is Lakeisha. I'd just like to say, as we close out, the exercises like what we're doing today are so critical in identifying those spaces where we can find a lot of common interest, so that as we go out and look for partners that may be interested in matching dollars with us, we can find those spaces that are challenges for them as well, or those areas where they're invested. And so I think that it is harder, but everything is easier when we're working together for the common good than just trying to do it individually. So I'm really excited by the potential to continue to grow this relationship.
Great. And I am gonna put one more comment out there because it's something the Organic Center has been interested in for a while, and I'm moderating, so I get to do it. And it is a comment that there are a lot of challenges for organic farmers, and organic farmers don't always have all of the same tools available that conventional farmers do. So equipment and technologies that can automate field activities and limit human labor are needed for daily operations. And you know, the commenter notes that it's not organic specific, but it would really help the industry grow by reducing overall costs to allow for further investments in organic production. So I just wanted to note that connecting organic with ag tech is one of our priorities and has been. So I'm glad you put that up there because it's another big gap area. And we are completely out of time. So is my video frozen for everyone? We're gonna close it out because that's an awesome face I'm making. But please fill out that survey. We didn't get to all of the questions or comments. There are a lot out there. So make sure we'll record everything that we have here, but also please fill out that survey. All right, thanks everyone. And we will hopefully hear from you soon.
Thank you.
Yeah.